Good morning. So I think we have a very interesting discussion in terms of digital transformation, digital innovation. And before we, open this discussion to Francis and Paolo, my observation of working with various banks and financial services organizations in globally has been today's world, all digital innovation, digital transformation starts with data. Second, people are averse to doing large-scale digital transformation. They want to plan it out in a step-by-step approach rather than doing a large-scale transformation exercise. Again, as I mentioned, everything is central around data. It used to be central around technology 2 decades back, but I think data and technology are kind of coming together in that sense. With that, I'll probably start with you, Paolo. How do you see digital transformation in your organization? And how do you see executives look at that from a sponsorship standpoint? Is it still a game changer? What is the value, perceived for such initiatives within your organization?
So thank you for that, Durjoy. I think for Maybank specifically, it really depends, because we're a multinational company. So it depends on what type of maturity the country is. So if you look at our office in Malaysia, for example, where it's the market leader, it's essentially a requirement because they're keeping up with the market, especially as it evolves. In the Philippines, however, being a small player here, the game changer aspect is really how do we make our operations more efficient so that our cost to doing business is better than a large organization. That being said, I think data comes into play in every aspect that you would need efficiencies on, because 10 years ago you're working essentially with manual data handling, SAS, programmatic data, Excel in certain cases, where now with the emergence of AI, with the emergence of even something like social media, that volume of data would require more, holistic thinking in terms of how do you manage it, how do you tune out the bad data, and how do you simplify it in such a way where your executives would be able to appreciate it without you going into the whole, minute or 2 minute, information.
Great. And Paulo, just extending that, right? So how does the exec sponsorship coming along for doing some of these things, initiatives within Maybank?
Honestly, and I think the ones here that handle senior management would relate is, it really depends on the person.
Okay.
Because if the executive is used to handling things BAU, and again, success sometimes feeds on itself, right? So if you're already working with, hey, I'm working with 80% offline and we haven't gotten any issues on efficiency, then you kind of get a pushback, right? But if your board and your senior management is forward-looking, and if they're more risk-taking, that's when the transformation becomes more prevalent, right? So again, it's a bit of personality, a bit of risk appetite, and then a bit of foresighting, right?
Got it.
That's how.
Yeah, got it. So Francis, just contrasting that with what Paolo mentioned, right? At BDO is obviously a larger organization. You have probably gone through multiple cycles of transformation, technology transformation, digital transformation per se. So is it something that is happening constantly? Is it that something that your exec team is basically asking questions, challenging you or your peers or the teams per se? How is digital transformation? Where does it start? Where does it finish for you at BDO?
Well, first off, I don't think our organization has a monopoly of digital transformation. I'm pretty sure for those of us who are part of the local universal banks and maybe even the fintechs, know for a fact that it's been happening even prior to the pandemic. And obviously, we know that the pandemic basically just accelerated how fast we had to do it. And interestingly enough, the pace was not just done. So I'm from IT, was not just triggered because of IT, but because of executive sponsorship. The senior leadership in every organization saw the advantages of going down that path. And they also acknowledge that there is no end to it. It will be a continuous journey towards whatever next generation digital transformation there is. Paolo mentioned earlier AI. So a lot of the financial services organizations in the Philippines are investing, albeit heavily or not so heavily, but still investing, because they recognize the advantages that they can get out of it, both internally and obviously externally. They acknowledge also that the whole digital transformation journey is getting them closer to their customer, getting them more aligned with what their customer wants and what their customer needs. And alongside that, the digital transformation also allows for their employees to do better, to do, faster time to market, more products, so on and so forth, and with their partners. Because a lot of the times we forget that, the partnerships that we have with a lot of the providers here as well, they are part of that transformation journey. And it's good for basically anyone in the BFSI sort of community, along with the solution providers and service vendors. So yeah, I think it's not just us, everybody is part of it. And then obviously it's going to be continuous, and executive leadership, in fact, is at the helm of demanding people like myself to do this faster, because they recognize how fast it needs to be.
Got it. And how does the planning work? Is it like an annual plan cycle? Is it a 3-year cycle, 2-year cycle? How does it work? Do you have components which are much longer and some which are probably much more componentized for you?
I think there will always be strategic planning, but how to be nimble about sort of planning is also important. So the strategic, obviously the big ones, like your core systems, any sort of upgrade or any replacement activity happening, that's always strategic. But then you get pushed against the wall because you realize, oh, by the way, this particular system is going to get obsolete within the next 6 to 12 months. So that gets you thinking, okay, what do we need to do now? So that's your tactical in a sense. And what is important, at least in this conversation, would be, are we always kept abreast of what's happening and what's available? Whether it be a solution or a technology, whether we do it or we get someone to help us get to that destination. It's a long sort of, that's part of the conversation. So yeah, it's a mix of both longer term planning and short term sort of nimble short periods of planning.
Got it. And what considerations do you take into play, right? There are a whole bunch of conflicting considerations that comes into play, right? Privacy, then data, ethics, people, technology, adoption, right? How do you, balance that out, or how do you maneuver that whole bunch of, very conflicting considerations while planning your digital transformation or innovation per se?
Definitely, obviously customer first. Thinking like what value would this particular direction give to our customers? That's one. Second, of course, from a data privacy perspective or from a security perspective, that's almost equivalent to making sure that it works for the customer, because obviously they go hand in hand. And of course, what value will it bring to the organization? Will it magnify capabilities that we currently have? And I think cost is a factor, but more recently as a whole, and I'm talking about like the entire sort of BFSI industry in the Philippines, cost is no longer sort of it is still a factor, but it's no longer a preventive factor, because now people see that, if you want really good solutions, really good technology, you have to put where your money is, exactly, so to speak, and invest, because the longer term benefits from doing that better, you reap those rewards. So.
Yeah, I think that's a very good statement you made, Francis, right? More than the cost is the value that people are looking at, right? And recently, one of my clients, right, is the largest, again, it's not a banking client, it's more of a consumer goods client. We have just started working with them. He made a comment, right? You pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? And that was very, very, very profound to me. In that sense, people are looking for value rather than looking at the cheapest option, right? So, Paolo, coming back to you, right? You are in a completely different setup in terms of, you already have your Malaysia entity to look up to as to what they have done and probably replicate some of that here. But within the Philippines construct, what are your key drivers or key constraints within which you are trying to innovate and transform your business here in Philippines?
I think I'll be a devil's advocate to what Francis said. So for Maybank, and in addition to everything that Francis said, there are two things that we consider, actually three. The first one is on cost. We're actually moving away, most institutions I know move away from cost, but they're more focused on ROI. Now the problem with ROI is that the definition of ROI can change depending on the board and senior management. And the definition of ROI often is actually considered as financial, but when you look at it, to our point in terms of customer value, the bigger the ROI impact now, it's shifting more towards what is the customer value that essentially can translate to a financial return for the institution. So I think that one, it's evolving. It's not yet there, but I'm glad that the thinking is evolving in that sense. So that, I'm spending $1 million, I need to get $1 million in return. But if you say, we get 80% better NPS, and through our analytics, we say that if your NPS grows by 1 percentage point, your bottom line goes up by 20 basis points. So essentially, there's that analytic framework already involved as opposed to a straight line. Does this make money for us in 2 years? Second, and I think most banks here would share the sentiment, is how does it impact the regulatory framework or the regulatory compliance of the bank? Because as we very well know, the more it is convenient for the client, the riskier it will be for the bank. Once you eliminate certain requirements on KYC, on screening, on OTP, on validation, then you introduce a whole lot of problems which might get us into trouble with our auditors, our regulators and whatnot. So that balance actually is the biggest challenge, especially if your risk appetite is very, very low. The third one, and I think this one is common now, is fraud. Because no matter how good your technology is, fraudsters will find a way to penetrate or exploit another avenue that you haven't thought about. Case in point. And for those who have been working for at least 10 years, 10 years ago, the biggest fraud is skimming. ATM skimming. Right? Because it's very easy to buy that machine. Right? When banks invested in security, it makes it more expensive because you can only buy the machine once. Right? Now what do? They now do mule. They now do account takeover. And they don't do mule and account takeover for the sake of their own account. They do it to actually defraud other people. So it's a 2-layer fraud now. Now, the downside to that is, and I think, this is the fifth one, is that even if we have such good tech partners, the fact that the Philippines does not have singular databases. We don't have a national identification database. Our CIC is still not fully mature. We do not have a fraud check database. We do not have an open banking framework. So, if somebody defrauds a bank, likely they can do it 4 or 5 times before the fraud becomes expensive. As opposed to if the systems are here, you defraud Bank 1, and I'm sorry for Bank 1, but once they get caught on Bank 1, they will not be able to use the ID anymore. They will not be able to use the transaction anymore. They will not be able to use the account anymore. So that is the biggest challenge for the Philippines. We have the tools from abroad, but our back-end framework does not support it yet. So it's still manumatic. It's still hilaw. So, it's still a cost to the bank just to do a checker on those systems.
And again, that's a very interesting point of view, Paolo. What we see working with our clients, primarily in the banking and insurance space, two things, right? Apart from obviously some of the things that you talked about, cost, value, then fraud, and basically the customer side, right? How do you balance between customer value and internal controls, right? There are two other things that is coming up a lot in our discussion. One is obviously people is always a challenge, right? How they are able to adapt to new technologies, new practices, right? And as part of that, what we always get a request from our clients saying that we need change agents. These change agents are basically helping the organization in adapting to the new processes, new technologies, new innovations. So I think the focus has become more on adoption now, because they say I can build a very, very genuine solution tool, but by the time it gets adapted, become prevalent in a bank or a financial services organization, it's like 2 years, 3 years. By then, the technology has changed, the world has shifted, right? So therefore, having change agents within the organization is becoming more and more relevant. Again, I'm talking from a global perspective, but that's becoming a very key part of the whole digital transformation exercise. So moving on, in terms of right now, we talked about, various constraints and, considerations. Now, you also are dealing with multiple stakeholders, right? You have your exec team from whom you need the sponsorship. You have your customers. We talked about customer value. You have your shareholders. You have your employees, right? Now, how do they perceive these changes, right? So, for example, it again depends on, from a customer standpoint, right? There is Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, and then their perception is completely different, right? Somebody may not have used a smartphone, and you are giving them, moving everything to smartphone. How does it, create a perception? So you are basically balancing between all different types of stakeholders, right? Your exec, your shareholder, your employees, your customers. How do you balance that when you look at a particular digital transformation or digital innovation initiative within your bank?
I'll speak more generally and probably speaking from my maybe my opinion. I think organizations should be able, from a customer perspective, it's difficult because to your point, you have a cohort that says you're too slow. You have another cohort that says you're too fast. So how do you deal with that, right? So the balance there is go with every cohort. So identify who your cohorts are in terms of usage and don't go around it. I heard this for the past week, actually. Like when you define cohorts, don't define them by just age. Define them by where they're at in their lives, by what kind of human being they are. So effectively, you're talking about Gen Z. But Gen Zs are a lot. Different kinds of Gen Zs. You have Gen Zs who graduated from a specific school or are in a specific location, et cetera, et cetera. So there are specifications on that particular cohort that you need to address, and therefore they feel like they're included. So you have another cohort, like say my mom, who feels horrible when she's got to pay Ube Pandesal using her BPI application. I'm like, why are you not using BDO? Anyway, different topic. Or she'll say, oh, you know what, I don't know how to use QR. And I have to literally go through the process of how she needs to upload the QR to use her either GCash or Maya application. And she does have to. She's a 78-year-old mom who basically got her mobile phone in the last 4 years. So that's a cohort right there, right? So how do you make it easier for them to adapt? For Gen Zers, it's easy. You put some icon there, they can adapt easily. Now, it's interesting, different perspective from, like, say, stakeholders. Like, say, you have bank executives or you have senior leaders in a specific business unit. There are those who are a little bit, I'd say, I don't want to say scared. Maybe, yeah, thank you, hesitant in going through sort of massive transformation. using a browser, for example, for an application is sometimes a little bit, they get queasy. So they'd rather make sure that it's a thick client on their machine or what have you. But there are those, obviously, there are people who prefer accessing applications through browser because it's much faster. They see sort of like the workflows much quicker. So I think, to your point again, like the balance needs to be there. The feel, like the employee experience, whether you use a loan origination system or whether you use a credit card evaluation system or what have you, like it has to be akin to whoever is going to be using it. And to be fair, we try different things. We try one thing, and if there are hesitations, what we do is we get the feedback, which is always important, because the end goal, at least for this, is that they follow you in the transformation, right? So if you feed their hesitation, if you feed their resistance, then they won't go with you in that journey. So it's important to see them eye to eye and be with them in the trenches, whatever they experience. Make yourself experience the same thing so that you understand what they're saying. Like, I don't know what this whole thing is. We no longer have the paperclip from Microsoft, right? I don't know if you're old enough to remember that there was a time when there was that paperclip that would pop up to help you, give you a tip. Now, I don't think Copilot does that, but that's basically what these people need. So we have to be that paperclip. So my team has to be that paperclip if they need assistance in going through a specific process, going through a specific solution, etc. So I think that helps sort of the resisting ones, the ones who are in it because they love it. You don't even need anything. They will just go for it naturally because it's organic. So yeah.
Got it. Yeah. In fact, that brings an interesting point of view in the sense right now, for every digital innovation or any transformation work that you're doing, you have to basically not build those innovative implementation for one, general section of employees or customers. You have to basically build 4 different versions or 6 different versions for each of the cohorts per se. Right? So that makes it more complex because now you are focusing on ensuring that you are taking all the cohorts along with you, right?
I'll add something really quickly. I don't know if you guys know what the top application on both Google Play and Apple Store is right now. Do you? Okay. It's Temu. Do you know that? So if you were a banking institution, shouldn't your question be, do I have my pay capability or payment capability on that particular application? So that's a cohort. There is a cohort of people, of Filipinos, and this is in the Philippines, who use that application, who've been downloading that application, and I tried it out. I saw no bank is there because everybody's on either Lazada or Shopee for sure. The next is TikTok. I'm sure you guys know TikTok, right? Again, there's no banking, whether it even be GCash or PayMaya, there's no connection, there's no presence. So imagine the possibilities of just those two from an e-commerce perspective. So this is what I mean by we have to be in the trenches with all those cohorts that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's an interesting example, Francis. Now, Paolo, coming back to you, right? Again, how are you dealing with these different cohorts or different stakeholders? Forget about cohorts. They have different set of stakeholders. Within each of the stakeholders, there are different set of cohorts, right? So it's and again from a organization which is.
I think I'll group it into 2. Okay. One is management, and then everyone else. Okay. For management, I think the first thing that to Francis' point on cohorts, the first thing that we always look at least my team, is who is really the customer. Because sometimes the customer is not the consumer. Sometimes the customer is your frontline sales. Sometimes the customer is your mortgage partner. Sometimes the customer is your audit because you need to show that your app or doesn't give away the data. Sometimes the customer is that irate board member that says, why then am I not seeing my balance in this application? So that's one. So that's your audience. Now, from that audience, you then determine, at least for us, is this a front-end solution? Is this a back-end solution? Or is this a non-tech solution? Because sometimes, and I think we get excited about, oh, everything can be solved by technology. When in fact, a lot of times, we look at first, what is our policy? Because even if the technology is there, for example, you have a credit card app that gets 5 information only for the customer. It's good, right? But your policy requires that you need 19 information. What do you do with that app? Right? Or that board member I said earlier that's irate on the balance, but there's a policy that states you cannot expose the balance because some other customer might, do something with it. What do you do? Right? So that's how we manage it. It's really short of saying that it depends. It's a long way of saying it depends. But again, what I've learned being in this role is that a lot of times, it's really what is essentially the question first before having, oh, it's a digital answer. And once you have that, 90% of your problems go away. Because you don't have any issues with sponsorship, you don't have any issues on approvals, because everything clicks, right? But if you get the question wrong, every step of the way somebody says, but you know what? So there. Now for the consumer, again, devil's advocate. A lot of times, what the consumer wants essentially is not what's profitable for the company.
Yeah.
So again, us being managers, being the ones who have to balance these two things, have to ask ourselves, which among these things can generate value for the bank, even if that thing itself will not generate the income. Case in point. If you have an app that can bring in customers by risking some information, but you can remediate that information anyway because you know that they're going to take up a loan, which would require you to do KYC anyway because you need to underwrite, then risk one, right? And then that's how you then sell it to the board or the management because you say, you give on the right, you take from the left. But it doesn't necessarily mean that because a customer wants a deposit, but also wants a loan easily, that you'll give away the loan. Make the deposit easy, but make the loan hard. Or flip it. Make the loan easy, but make the deposit hard. So that one of those two products will earn you something from the bank. So that's the challenge always. It's that the innovation, honestly, the bigger your bank, the harder it is. It's like a boat, right? If you're a small boat, it's easy to navigate. But once you're in a ship, your engine might not be agreeing with your captain. Not all the time. And if that engine says, heck, I'll just stop the ship, then what do you do, right? So that's the challenges that we see. But again, sometimes it's just really asking the right question, right?
Yeah, in fact, that's a good segue to the next point that I wanted to call out, Paolo, right? Again, how do you then take this forward, right? You actually gave some examples, right? Customer value versus company's profitability, right? Regulators versus, customer transparency, right? Similarly, employee inertia versus adoption, right? So how do you, so you basically brought that out saying it's all about, what's the question, what's the solution? Sometimes digital is not the solution. Digital is just an enabler for you. So how do you, how are you basically, on what basis you decide the road ahead within Maybank whenever you are doing some digital innovation or transformation activity?
Well, let me start off with that. In most cases, and I think project management and the agile framework has this, is that you really evaluate it in terms of what is the fastest, quickest, and easiest way to do it. Because even if you fail, the fact that you haven't invested millions on it would essentially give it, there's value to trying. But on our side, for example, the way we evaluate it is, on my team, for example, we do essentially a checklist in terms of what's the value proposition, how much is the incremental value, so that there's always that structure on whether it's a yes or no. And anyone who asks, we'll just show them the paper. Because honestly, you cannot counter analysis. If somebody presents you with an analysis, it's so hard to counter because you have to think through the analysis, right? As opposed to, boss, I also feel this way, but I'm the boss, so, right? But if I say, boss, we did this feasibility analysis, market size is this, most of our customers are this, comp scan is this, our sense is that it's 8 out of 10. Now, if he challenges that it's 9 out of 10, then you get the benefit of him explaining things to you, right? So I think that framework, because a lot of times we think that because it's agile, you just do things because you feel like it. But that's where more of the structured thinking comes in, because there's so many things that you can do. There's so many things. Just to give you an idea, from the start of this year up until today, I have 128 ideas from every part of the company, from a supervisor in auto loans, from the board of director, from the national salesman. Everyone has their idea. But when you ask them, how much is your idea worth to the bank? Simple question, elevator pitch. They'll say, no, it's just a good idea. Right? So I think that structured thinking, that helps polishes a lot of the starting point. And then from there, you'll figure out already, it's not worth it. Or, yeah, it's worth it, but, we can do that next year when we have more money.
And Francis, obviously, it's much more complex for you. How do you then plan these, right? You have, obviously, stakeholders, you have cohorts, you also have to look into all the conflicting thing, right? Customer value versus profitability, employee skill set versus what is required to make this happen. Similarly, in terms of, adoption rates and all that. So how do you plan that out, right? Because you may have something very nice in the drawing board, but at the end of the day, when the dust hits the ground, you figure out that it's not happening. So how do you ensure that, whatever you're planning is actually implementable and going to drive the benefits that you are planning to?
I think for us, based on my experience, it's always been key to be aligned with the businesses because they have the ear on the ground, basically. From an IT standpoint, we always need to listen because that's their business. They know that like the back of their hand. So what we need to be able to provide and acknowledge and be humble enough to say is that we will help you get to whatever result you want to get to. So now our job is, okay, we need to find sort of whatever solutions are available that addresses it, whether like to Paolo's point, like 80%, 90%, whatever. And provide them with that contextual and data-driven analysis so that decisions can be made out of it. So, and the good thing about this is there is shared accountability to that decision because IT provides sort of their list of things that these are the reasons why we think this is better. And then they'll say, businesses would say like, these are the reasons why we feel this is better. If there's an impasse, of course, discussions happen, but more often than not, there's good alignment, whether it be a sort of 85% kind of okay or yes. That's not as bad as a 50-50, because 50-50s are terrible. They drag on for like hours and days. But an 85% ain't so bad. So when you get to that point, then you basically plug it in, part of your pipeline, part of your funnel, and you just make sure that everybody's on board, everybody signs up, and is also making themselves accountable to get to that whatever result, whatever that solution or whatever that project would be. So,
and I think, sorry, just to add, the good thing about this, and I think it displays into this event, is that in the last 5 or so odd years, we've seen partners, such as yourself, actually develop modules that can be scalable, where a bank can actually do a POC for 5% of their clients or a particular region, do everything in the cloud, test whether the front end works, the back end works, any risk and whatever, then implement it on premise. So I think for you guys who want to implement something like this, try first a POC and try a cloud-based approach where you, even if your bank is very hesitant, do a private cloud because that actually helps everyone understand what the risk is and understand what the framework is. So that, because 9 out of 10, when you demo it to the board, like if you do a use case where boss, this is how it's used, 9 out of 10 they agree.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
So
Yeah.
so I think that one it helps with the structure now with our partners that we can do POCs.
Got it. Thanks, Francis. Thanks, Paolo. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to check if there are any questions from the audience that you would like to ask Francis and Paolo.
Hi, good morning. I'm Janice from Una Bank. My question is, since we're talking about digital shift game changer in the Philippines, what do you see is the social impact of digital shift to our society in the Philippines? Did it become more inclusive? Did people have more access to finance? So that is my question.
So Janice, thank you so much for prompting that question. Literally, I was thinking about that while I was brushing my teeth this morning. I kid you not. I was thinking about it in the context of how inclusive is digital in finance and in banking, digital banks or digital like applications in general. I was thinking about if I become blind, will I be able to use my app? Can I literally can I tell Siri or I don't know who the counterpart in Google is, but can I tell, like my phone to check my balance on something? Will it be able to check my face? If I were Muslim, do I have the ability to do my banking with financial services in the Philippines? If I were, all of these different cohorts or identities, generally speaking, I believe yes. But whether or not it's enough, definitely it will never be enough. So I believe eventually it has to catch up because diversity is becoming more and more a thing. Inclusivity is becoming more and more a thing. And if you do not allow, for example, like my mom, she can't read some of the applications that some of us, I'll include myself, some of us have. She can't read it. So she has to use her reading glasses and check, did she transfer 1,000 pesos or 100 million pesos? I mean, things like that. I wish she had 100 million. But I mean, things like that, we have to be conscious of it as a group or as a community. Because at the end of it, the 70% that we always brandish around, or the unbanked or the underserved, is it still 70% or did it increase or did it decrease? Because I'd be curious, to be honest, because that's always been the target market of your organization, the other organizations, our organization. So if you're able to hit on that 70 and make it 60, then yes. But should it be 50, 40, 30? Definitely. Now, how fast is now our responsibility, our accountability to make sure that it's inclusive as much as possible. And my last point on that matter is I feel very, very strongly around providing financial services to the far-flung areas of the country. The problem is signal. I don't even know if they're telcos here, but signal. Now, we do not have capability to push the telco. So, hey, bigyan nyo naman, give signal to the people from, I don't know, from whatever location. But yeah, we need that. There are other partners in making financial services more inclusive to the Filipino community, and they all need to sign up for that along with us. So,
I think in terms of inclusion, we have to define, how do we define inclusion? We need to define that. Because if you look at it on a formal banking standpoint, admittedly there are a lot of barriers, especially for the lower income. They don't necessarily have an ID. We can't do an effective credit check with them. They're highly transient. So it's very difficult, I'll tell you now. But if you're talking about transactions. And the pandemic and GCash and you guys actually had a very, very good involvement in that. I think that's a low-hanging fruit because it benefits the people who use it primarily because you don't need that physical cash. And these people are the most prone, are the most vulnerable to getting robbed, to getting scammed. Second is it helps everyone because there's a trace. That trace, that how your funds get transferred, that's very important. You know why? Because if foreign investors know that there's transparency in our transactions, then the Philippines becomes a very, very attractive place to do work. Because there's not much hidden anymore, right? There's no under the table, there's no. So social inclusion essentially helps the economy at large. The problem is, like what Francis mentioned, the infrastructure doesn't support it. We don't have a last mile strategy for telco. My kasambahay lives in an island that only has electricity from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. and do not have, and the nearest cell phone signal is a boat ride away. But that island has almost 5,000 people. So you're telling me that somebody like a Meralco or a Globe won't go there just because it's far. But you have Starlink that for 20,000 pesos, that barangay can, or that town can have internet connection and whatnot. But that's not our problem to solve. That's the problem, right? So even if I tell you guys that Maybank's goal is to reach 100% of Filipinos, but 20% of those Filipinos I can't even call today, very difficult, right? Now, you guys, because you guys are less than 40 years old, at least most of you guys, you are the ones who will be the CEOs, the board of directors. Some of you guys will go to government. You have to think through this problem. Because this problem, during even my time of my dad, is already a problem. And here we are now, 40 years down the road, and it's still a problem. So, so a lot of people say, oh, it's the bank's responsibility to do social, to do social expansion. But not really. Because we have the tools. Somebody have an internet connection tomorrow, they can log on to a bank. Can apply for a BDO credit card, can apply for an iSave account, can do a GCash account. But if they don't have any signal, even if they have a Fold 71 version 5, right? Camera lang yun. See? So, so we have to define that. We have to, and I think it's all our responsibility to push. And again, the elections are coming, to push our government to go where we want it to go, right? It's not private sector, it's everyone, right? And once you have that, and again, sorry, I'll segue also. I want all of you guys, as much as possible, to travel. Because you know what? Once you go to the Japans of the world, the Koreas of the world, the Thailands of the world, you will see how bad we have it. And once you have that motivation to see, I want that. I want Japan's infrastructure. I want Thailand's infrastructure. Then all of the things we're talking about, social imbalances, solve it in a decade, solve it in a generation. But without us saying that, this is a bad deal. No?
Yeah.
Nothing
So
with
I'll
that.
just sound a positive note with that, right? Saying that, this is not impossible, this has been done elsewhere. It's just that, I think it's up to all of us to make it happen. It's not a one person or one organization's job, but it has happened, right? I come from India, I have seen that happen, transform in last 10, 15, 20 years, where today the mobile penetration is almost 99%. Yeah. So yeah, with that, we end this session. Thanks Francis, thanks Paolo for this session. Yeah.
Thank you.